Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. In today's episode of Orchestration for Beginners, I want to show you some of the pitfalls that await you in your first orchestral work. Let's begin. So on the screen is the first version of my symphony, which I composed about 10 or 12 years ago before I got a proper training in harmony. Not orchestration, but proper training in harmony. So notice that we have 3 solo first violinists and 3 solo wind instruments. It's just not balanced, okay? In general, you're going to need an entire violin section, so first violins or second violins or like violas, to match one woodwind instrument. Now, it depends on a lot of other factors, the register they're placed in, how, the octave, the doubling, but in general, you need an entire part, okay? So it's not balanced. Also notice that the woodwinds are at the bottom and the violins are double an octave higher, so the woodwinds are going to suck up all of our attention. Notice that the woodwinds, there's 3 of them, which makes sense because it's a 3-note chord. But many times when you're orchestrating 3-note chords, you're going to have to actually utilize the woodwinds in pairs because otherwise you have 2 flutes and 1 clarinet, so there's just an imbalance in that sound. So what I would recommend just as a quick stopgap measure, which will not address the overall issue of balance with the violins, is to add a second clarinet and have it at the unison with the flutes. Now, another thing is notice the flutes are in fourths, okay? This may feel a little bit strange, especially if you're thinking in terms of triads and more like thirds and sixths. So be careful on what intervals that you're using to orchestrate. Now, going to the next chord, notice that we have good voice leading, okay? So not everything is bad in your first orchestral work. A lot may probably be good, okay? So we have good voice leading. Notice that the chord overall is quite darkly orchestrated. Not super thunder dark, but a little bit dark because we have the low A flat and the double bass, tuba as well. Trombones on a perfect fifth in the lower register, so it's going to slow down the motion, darker feeling. Violin 1 on that C and A flat, so not the most brilliant register. So there's a darkness and coolness to the register. Brass are in a lower medium register, okay? So it's a nice, quite nicely orchestrated, I would say. But it is contradicted by the fact that we have these high first violins that are very thin sounding, supported an octave lower by these random, like what will feel like random woodwind instruments. Finally, in the measure afterwards, notice that we have subito piano, but we have the strings and we have the strings prior. We have the brass, we have the brass prior. We have the woodwinds, we have the woodwinds prior. So another issue I see with beginner orchestrators is a lack of contrast, in particular between sections. Now I'd like to show you later in my first symphony, again, this is before I got proper training in harmony. In the second half of this video, I'll show you how I fix some of these problems. Notice that we have 2 different sections. We have an F sharp major section, light, quick, and we have an F major section, which is noble, longer note values. But we're using a lot of instruments, right? We have woodwinds and woodwinds. Brass, no brass. That's good, okay? We have strings, and then we have strings. Now, I took out the lower strings, so it's not going to be egregious, but again, there must be a way to get more brilliance and sharpness and clarity in the orchestration, which I'll show you in the second half. Notice that the violins they're missing certain partials of the chord, which could be intentional, but definitely looking back, I had to rely on the woodwinds to fill it in, so it kind of just creates this charged orchestration because I don't fully know how to kind of bring in all the notes that I need at this point in time. Notice that the xylophone is on a triad. It's going to be really loud, way too loud. It's just going to like catch all the attention, okay? One other thing to notice is there's a piano. And I want to touch upon a delicate situation, but it has to be talked about, especially for your first orchestral work, okay? I have a piano because I applied to a competition that said you can have a piano. However, I did not win the competition, and then if I hadn't reorchestrated this work, I would be stuck with a piece that has a piano, which has an extra expense. Be careful of competitions because, unfortunately, there's a lot of competitions, they don't outwardly tell you what they're looking for, and they may be looking for certain demographic information that you have no ability to conform to. It's totally out of your control. And so therefore you may be applying to a competition that you have zero chance of winning, not because of anything in your ability or the quality of your orchestration. For those of you who are applying to our own orchestration competition here at Composition and its Allies, don't forget to submit within the deadline, and don't forget to review and sign off on the Equality and Fairness Clause. Okay, let's listen to the new version. All right, so first and foremost, notice that we have clear sections, okay, orchestrationally. So before the key change, we have woodwinds, brass, and strings. After, we have just the strings. Just simple, effective, direct. Notice we still have the xylophone. So clearly, I wasn't totally off from, where I was 7 years prior, okay? I was hearing certain things, just not totally acutely. Now, notice I have the xylophone in octaves, right? So reinforcing the tonic, so only 2 mallets total, so it'll be much better able to blend. Now, it still will be very noticed, very pronounced, especially its higher register, but far, far better, okay? Notice that I brought in the violas so I can have fuller, more complete chords. Notice the intervals, so the first violin is on the 4th, I have the 5th in the violin 2, and I have the 3rd tucked below. Notice that because I have a neutral, clean string background, then when I bring in the woodwinds, they pop, right? So you have the string background, which is homogeneous, then the clarinets sticks out against it, then the trumpets. Now, another thing to think about is when I orchestrated out of the clarinets, when I bring in the trumpets, it's not just the trumpets have to fit into this chord, they also got to blend well with the clarinets. Now let's listen to the beginning section. So what do you notice? I just reorchestrated with 6 solely first violinists, okay? Way more homogeneous. Now, I know when you're orchestrating your first work, you're really excited about matching timbre, like you're really fascinated by this. But a lot of times that matching, you have to contrast the sections, okay? So this is much more homogeneous. Now, I still have them in octaves, so that principal feeling is still there of doubling it in octaves. Notice in the next measure, we still have that dark kind of rustic quality of the chord, double bass on the A flat. I took out the tuba. Notice I kind of pushed the trombones up with the octave now. Okay, we still have the bassoons now in octave A flats. Okay, the other violins are starting on that C and A flat. So we see things very similar. Okay, but a little more refined. We have the solely first violinist at the very top of the chord, very shiny and bright. And then below, we have the flutes, we have the oboes, and we have the clarinets in that kind of medium upper register, and then trumpets in a more medium register. So overall, we have a chord that's orchestrated such that we have a dark, weight to the bottom. It's oriented a little more towards the bottom, but it gets lighter and thinner progressively as we get to the top of the chord. Finally, notice in the next measure, just strings, okay? Super simple. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to get better orchestration, I recommend starting with how to orchestrate your piano sketches. And if you're going to be applying to our first ever competition here at Composition and its Allies, make sure you submit within the deadline. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.